What is up, guys? BK Voiceover here, and welcome once again to the channel. Today, we're still in the middle of that very quiet, boring part of the off-season between the end of OTAs and mandatory minicamp and the start of training camp and the preseason. On the bright side, we got about a month until we get down to training camp, and when that pops around, there's going to be a lot more content, a lot more cool stuff to talk about. But in the meantime, all we can do is sort of speculate about what's going on. So today's video, I wanted to take a look at 5 Seahawks training camp battles that are very intriguing going into training camp. I think field goals. I was making the video on this and I saw that field goals made a similar article and had the same guys picked out. Yeah, it was pretty funny. But yeah, I think that it's a good time to go and take a look at the 5 most intriguing training camp battles and kind of give my way too early predictions as to who is going to win those spots. So without further ado, we'll get started. Number 1 is the starting quarterback job. Of course, there's really only, at this point, 2, potentially 3, depending on how the Baker Mayfield stuff shakes out. But it's really a 2-man competition between Geno Smith, who was Russell Wilson's backup for a very long time, and Drew Lock, who obviously we got from the Denver Broncos, is a part of the Russell Wilson trade. So taking a quick look at their stat lines, even going into the offseason, Geno Smith was always going to be slightly ahead of Drew Lock just because he's more familiar with the system. Geno was very efficient in the games that he played last season, so he came in for like a quarter during a Rams game and then started the 3 other games while Russell Wilson was out with injury. He had a completion percentage of 68.4%, 702 yards through the air, a yards per attempt of 7.4, pretty okay. 5 passing touchdowns, which is pretty decent for him. Only threw 1 interception, and honestly, that 1 interception wasn't really his fault. The linebacker covering Lockett basically pulled Lockett down. Should have been a pass interference call, but it's whatever. It doesn't matter in the end. Pass rating of 103.0, which is just 0.1 less than what Russell Wilson had last season. But I think that more goes to show that pass rating is not as good of a stat as people make it out to be. Going over to 2021, Drew Lock definitely did not do as well. Had more volume of passes and games to look at, and did not look at better than Smith in those cases. So he played in 6 games, started 3 of them, completion percentage of 60.4%, 787 passing yards, 7.1 yards per attempt, 2 passing touchdowns, 2 interceptions, a passer rating of 80.4. Not very good at all. So looking at this, you would think like, oh, Geno is probably going to win the starting job, and that's fair. I mean, I think going into the offseason, Geno is definitely ahead of Drew Lock right now, but I think Drew Lock's upside is there. He was also had multiple offensive coordinators in his short time with Denver. He was just put in a situation to fail in that sort of offensive system. So hopefully moving into a new system, we can kind of see him more flourish in that way. But my prediction is that Drew Lock is going to win the starting job by the end of preseason. I think his upside is just higher than Geno. Geno is a very safe guy, and I know that he doesn't turn the ball. He didn't turn the ball over much last season, which I know Pete likes a lot, but unfortunately that is the exception. In looking at his history, that's the exception and not the rule. So yeah, moving on, I think, Drew Lock, I think, wins the starting QB job. So moving on to the second position battle to take a look at, that is wide receiver 3. And unlike the 2-man race for quarterback, I think this one's going to be a lot more intriguing. So as it stands right now, wide receiver 3 is going to be fought between 4 guys. So you got D. Eskridge, who was a second-round pick in the 2021 draft. Freddie Swain, who was a 6th-round pick in the 2020 draft. Marquise Goodwin, NFL veteran. Hugh, big burner, great deep threat. And then Bo Melton, who was our most recent addition. We drafted him in the 2022 NFL draft in the 7th round. So going down the line, Obviously, Bo Melton's stats stand out from everybody else's, but notice the little asterisk because he did not play in the NFL last season because he was still in college. So his numbers should look a lot better than the guys who are playing in the NFL in this level. So starting off, D. Eskridge, his entire rookie season was just mired by injuries. He missed the majority of training camp with injuries, so he wasn't able to get with the playbook. His very first game in the NFL, he was being effective against the Colts, and then gets one of the worst concussions I think most of us have seen, and he was out for 7 games. Did come back, but he had missed so much time at that point. He was so far behind in the playbook. It was pretty obvious that every single time you watched him, he just looked confused. He was running the wrong routes. He was doing a bunch of wacky stuff. So at the end, in 10 games, only had 123 total yards. Notice that I'm using total yards and not just receiving yards because a lot of these guys get usage out of the backfield. So yeah, he had 123 yards on 14 total touches, and 1 TD. It was a passing TD against the 49ers. 6.4 yards per reception, but 14.8 yards per carry. Very effective at his backfield, very twitchy. If he has a healthy offseason or a healthy training camp, I think that he can take that wide receiver 3 spot, but that's a big if because he has also been pretty unavailable for training camp, so we will see what happens. But I think that his upside is the highest of any of the guys here on this list. Number 2 was the de facto wide receiver 4 in D. Eskridge's absence. That was Freddie Swain. I played all 17 games last year, had 375 total yards on 30 touches, 4 touchdowns, 13.7 yards per reception, and 6.4 yards per carry. He was much more of a receiving threat than he was out of the backfield. And while he was effective in filling in for Eskridge, you could definitely see that he is not the guy you want as your wide receiver 3. He is a wide receiver 4, I think is his... He can be a wide receiver 3, but I think as he stands right now, he's more of a wide receiver 4. You need somebody who's more consistent to be your wide receiver 3. Moving on, Marquise Goodwin. He was a veteran pickup we got early in the offseason, or late in the offseason. 14 games last season with the Bears, 312 total yards on 22 touches and a touchdown. 15.7 yards per carry, per reception, excuse me. His yard per carry, negative 0.5. He only had 2 carries for negative 1 yard. So, yeah. Definitely, he is a deep threat almost exclusively. He's not going to be like your go-to slot guy, like an Eskridge or a Swain will. So I don't think that I think he's more of a camp body. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't make the final roster. Then last but not least, we got Bo Melton, who was one of our 7th round picks out of Rutgers. 10 games with Rutgers last season, 669 total yards on 64 touches for 3 touchdowns. 11.2 yards per reception and 5.7 yards per carry, more of a receiving threat. I think that he's going to be more of a special teamer. Definitely in the punt return, kick return game, a good gunner. He's going to need to blow the pants off a lot of people here in order to make the 53-man roster or to even just get into this wide receiver 3 position. So moving on to predictions, even with the injuries, I'm going to predict that D. Eskridge is your bona fide wide receiver 3 and will be your starting slot receiver by the end of training camp. That's just based off of, I think, his upside, assuming that he can shake this injury bug that's had him down pretty much his entire rookie season. Freddie Swain is going to fill the similar role to what he did his rookie season, being the utility guy and wide receiver 4, and then Marquise Goodwin will be either a wide receiver 5 or he won't make the roster at all. Bo Melton will make the roster as a gunner, and a core special teamer who occasionally makes it on the field. Moving on to starting right tackle. So I don't have the stats listed out here because putting up stats for a offensive lineman is less effective at evaluation than taking a look at other skill positions. But let's take a look at this. So 3 guys, after looking at all of the different reports out of mandatory minicamp and OTAs, it seems as though the rookie, Abraham Lucas, who we took in the early part of the third round in the draft this year, has overtaken the incumbent, Jake Curran, for all of the first team right tackle snaps. Jake Curran has been moved inside to right guard. That is less to do with his, he's a good right tackle. It was mainly to cover for injuries because Gabe Jackson is still nursing some offseason surgery. So he was playing right guard during OTAs and minicamp. Then you got Stone Forsythe, who was one of the biggest steals of the draft last year. We got him in the 6th round out of Florida. He is definitely more built as a left tackle, but during OTAs, he was getting some of those snaps at the right tackle spot. So definitely have to list him on here. But my prediction, Abraham Lucas is going to win the starting right tackle spot. I think his upside is the highest of all of them. Jake Curran is great. He's a great run blocker, but he has a lot of work to do in pass protection, which Abraham Lucas is a lot more of a polished pass protector, and in some cases is even a better run blocker. It's not that Lucas did play in an air raid offense, so he wasn't asked to run block a lot, but that doesn't mean he can't. So, and then Jake Curran will back up Lucas, assuming Gabe Jackson is back in time. Otherwise, I think he will back up right guard, and then assuming Gabe Jackson is back and healthy and everything, Forsythe is going to back up Charles Cross at left tackle. Moving on to outside linebacker is our 4th position to keep an eye on. So I think your starting 2 outside linebackers are pretty set. You got Darrell Taylor, who had a breakout season after missing his entire rookie year with a leg injury. Came out, had 6.5 sacks. So I think him and Uchenna Nwosu, who you signed to a 2-year, $20 million deal in the offseason, who tallied 5 sacks last season with the LA Chargers. I think he is going to be your outside linebacker 2 opposite Darrell Taylor. So the real question is, who's going to be your number 3? And it's not like a solid thing because these are going to change. They're going to rotate guys in and out throughout the game. So these obviously aren't going to be they're very fluid, but taking a look at the 3 guys, we got 2 rookies and 1 player who's going into his 3rd season. Boye Mafe is the big one. He's definitely the favorite to get that outside linebacker 3 spot. Rookie out of Minnesota, played all 12 games for the Minnesota Golden Gophers, tallied 34 tackles, no pass deflections, 1 forced fumble, 10 tackles for loss. Couldn't find any information on QB hits in his stat page, and 7 sacks. Alton Robinson, who is another going into the 3rd year of his season, going into his 3rd season out of Syracuse. He played all but 1 game last season. He only started 2 of them just because lots of other guys were taking snaps ahead of him, which I don't agree with, because he has, even last season, one of the highest pressure rates per snap of any pass rusher in the league. So, and he's like, oh, but he only got 1 sack and he only has 3 QB hits. How can that be? It's well, the reason is because he was not playing a lot. He was not getting on the field a lot. He was just stuck on the depth chart. 22 tackles, 1 pass deflection, 1 forced fumble, 5 tackles for loss, 3 QB hits, and a sack. And then last but not least, we got another pass rusher we got in the 2022 NFL draft, that being Tyreek Smith out of Ohio State. Played in 10 games last season. Had 26 tackles, 2 pass deflections, a forced fumble, 5 tackles for loss, an unknown number of QB hits, and 3 sacks. Again, not as flashy. He's got a good motor. He doesn't give up on plays, but again, I think he is sitting below both of these guys as it stands right now. So my predictions as it stands is Boye Mafe, just with his massive upside, wins the outside linebacker 3 role by the end of the preseason. Alton Robinson will be your outside linebacker 4, and Tyreek Smith is going to be at the bottom of the 53-man depth chart as your outside linebacker 5. And the final position group we're going to be taking a look at today is the final other starting outside corner spot opposite of Sidney Jones. I think with his play last season, Sidney Jones is locked in as one of your starting outside corners. The question is who is going to be opposite of him. Now, you could go a lot of ways. During OTAs and during mandatory minicamp, Artie Burns was taking the majority of the snaps on the outside. However, that was mainly due to injury. Kobe Bryant and Tariq Woolen were both nursing minor injuries, so they weren't participating as much during those mini camps. And Trey Brown is still rehabbing a knee injury from the past season. So he was getting a lot of snaps mainly because of those injuries. But Artie Burns is still a decent pickup in the offseason. A small deal, only like 1 year, $2 million. So even if he doesn't win one of the spots or he's just a depth piece, it's fine. So last year with the Bears, he played in 11 games, started 6 of those games, had 6 pass deflections, no interceptions, 23 tackles, and a tackle for loss. Kobe Bryant is the other intriguing one, 4th round pick out of Cincinnati, the other outside cornerback opposite Ahmad Sauce Gardner, the number 4 overall pick in the previous draft. Got thrown out a lot, held up really well, and now that he is feeling healthier and he's participating in the drills anymore, he is quickly catching up to Artie Burns in this outside cornerback race. I mean, just taking a look at his stats from his last season in Cincinnati, he was wild. He had played in 14 games, had 11 pass deflections, 2 interceptions, 44. One of those interceptions was a pick 6, 44 tackles, and a tackle and a half for loss. Trey Brown actually had a really good rookie season that was derailed by injuries. He was kind of smushed down on the depth chart early on in the season, but due to injuries, he was able to rise to the ranks and really shine in the few games he was able to. He really came on in his first start against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Played in 5 games, started 3 of those games. He had a pass deflection, no picks, 10 tackles, and no tackles for loss. Unfortunately, he did suffer a season-ending knee injury against the Cardinals in Week 11, which did put a damper on his season. Unfortunately, he's still rehabbing that and will likely be surpassed on the depth chart going forward until he's fixed on that. So taking a look at my predictions, I predict that by the end of preseason, Kobe Bryant is going to win the starting cornerback 2 spot opposite Sidney Jones. Artie Burns is going to default to your cornerback 3. Trey Brown is going to be your cornerback 4 while he rehabs injuries. If you're wondering, why don't you have Tariq Woolen on here? It's because Tariq Woolen is still very much learning the position. He was a wide receiver to cornerback convert. And he still just has a lot of things that he's learning about how to be a defensive back. He has all of the traits to be an elite player in the NFL. He's just very raw, and he needs time to really develop into that elite talent. So that's why I did not include him in the starting outside corner position. So those are the 5. Those are the 5 primary training camp battles that I'm going to be keeping an eye on going into training camp and the preseason, and definitely the ones that you guys should be taking a look at as well. And that's what I got for today. Again, thank you guys so much for watching. If you still are, be sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more Seahawks content. We're in a pretty quiet part of the off season, but once preseason and training camp starts rolling around and the regular season, we're going to be posting a lot more news and rumors and updates and other things along those lines. And if you want to be notified when I post, be sure to hit the bell icon next to the subscribe button to be notified every single time I post. And with that, that's what I got for today. Have a great rest of your evening, everybody. And as always, go Hawks.